Alex from Colorado. He has a question about. Read this. Questions about falsifiability and presuppositions. Alex from Colorado.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Hey.
Good. How are you?
It's really nice to talk to you guys. I'm pretty new to Truth Wanted, but I've been a fan of all the other shows for a long time. Erin, forgive me, it's the first time I'm kind of interacting or seeing you. Jmike, I've been a fan of yours for quite a while. But what I wanted to get to, sorry, I'll get right to it, is questions about, like I said, about presuppositions. And, you know, I think broadly familiar with presuppositional lists, right? And kind of the presup argument as at least as I think, right? I guess my question is, do we all have some level of presup? Like, do we have to have a presup to even get past solipsism?
That depends. I had a coffee with somebody who's super into philosophy, and they maintain that they have no presuppositions at all. I kind of took a similar line of reasoning. I kind of backed off that. I think that you do have to. There are certain things that you have to presuppose to get off the ground, and even just axiomatically, there's going to be some things that are potentially circular, but everybody kind of has to buy into those same things, right? So, like, if someone's like, if I present an argument to somebody and I go, or they present an argument, I say it's circular, and they go, yeah, but fundamentally, one of our axioms is going to be kind of circular. It's like you don't go there because we've both moved on from that point. Now it's kind of a basis of like where we go from there. If you're circular again, that's an issue. You don't want to continuously being circular if we've kind of acknowledged the initial axiom might either be presupposed or somehow circular in some way. So some people can take the route where they don't have any presuppositions, right? So, like, are you familiar with the laws of thought, like non-contradiction, excluded middle, and identity?
Yeah. Yes.
So it's like some people will take that, like, because you experience, right? It's some experience you have that you have no choice in the matter, right? If I tried to write an argument of me not existing in some state, like, it would rely me putting pen to paper to make the argument, thus kind of disproving any argument going against that because I'm doing something. And so their idea is kind of identity is self-evident, right? And so you start with identity. Right? It's not presupposed. I'm acknowledging it after the fact. And I'm acknowledging that I can't exist and not exist at the same time. Right? Now, I don't know how they cash that out, but that is an argument that they could take.
Okay. And so is that what kind of, I mean, I guess where I'm going is that level of presup what gets us around solipsism? Because, I mean, I think we both have to agree, you know, to have a conversation that, you know, we're not hard solipsist, right? That you know, we both agree that we do exist kind of thing. So are we presupposing that? Or is that kind of, am I taking the presup term and kind of bastardizing it into something?
Oh, no, I mean, no, I think you're making, that's a great point to go to. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm someone that's going to say I can't solve external world skepticism, which is my biggest problem with presuppositionalists. And I'll get into that. But yeah, I can't solve external world skepticism. Maybe you can present some argument, like a deductive argument for solipsism, and I can show why that, you know, isn't valid or not sound. But the general thesis of external world skepticism, like, did a demon create me 5 minutes ago with all my memories intact? It's totally, I don't see a logical contradiction why that couldn't be the case. So yeah, I'll have to just kind of presuppose what you call ontology, right? Like, that this is the actual world that I'm experiencing. I don't think that you have to presuppose, like, existence. Like, right, it seems to be the case that regardless of if I'm a brain novad or any of these things, I'm existing in some form, right? I can move from that. Now, if I'm like in a brain in a vat or something like that, like, I have no access to that. This is a waste of my time to worry about any of that. It could be the case, but I'm here dealing with the after effects. That's what I'm going to deal with. Now, the presuppositionalist, it's different because they're going to do, so they presuppose a specific form of ontology. They're presupposing this thing, God, right? For like intelligibility. It would be like me presupposing that there's these things called flabablas, and that explains why people, that explains why, like, Joe won a race, right? Joe competed in a race and he won. And my presupposition on why he won is that there's flabablas. Now, if someone came to me and goes, look, that's backwards. You need to know what a race is, right? So that means that I run faster than you by the finish line, I win. And we go, okay, Joe won that race. What does that imply to us? It implies there's some reason why Joe beat him. We go further into knowledge. And we go, oh, there's these things called genes, right? Genes explain why Joe won the race, right? Now, we might have to start from some base presuppositions. But if we started from a presupposition like blah, 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 this specific ontology is why Joe won the race faster, it's no different than a precept that says God's the reason. Because anytime someone presents an epistemic reason to say, well, actually, no, blah, blah, blah doesn't exist. It's actually this thing called genes, right? And the analogy I'm using is, no, God doesn't exist. It's actually just natural, right? The only thing that they can say is that, well, no, I presuppose God. They're going to go to that as their authority for what you would call your epistemic authority. They're going to go to that, and they would never, ever be overturned. So it's a difference between starting with a very specific ontology that you're presupposing, as opposed to saying, look, I could be a brain in a vat. I'm not making claims towards ontology, but there are certain things within the experience that I have to presuppose. And that's, to me, that's epistemically way better than what a precept does.
Yeah, and so to that last point you just made, right, does the concept of something like Occam's razor come in here? Would you believe it does, that it's most logical to believe something or presuppose, like if I'm using this term incorrectly, forgive me, but if we're using that and we're saying I'm presupposing, is it more logical to presuppose something that is the simplest, right, the easiest explanation like Occam's razor versus, the precept God argument? Like, would you agree with that, or am I conflicted?
Well, yeah. So I you could use Occam's razor. I go with principle of parsimony, which is basically the same thing. So it's just the idea that, like,
I've never heard that term. Can you explain that?
Principle of parsimony. Yeah. So it's basically essentially like the same idea. It's going to look at simplicity of the theory and in conjunction with the explanatory scope, right? So, like, I could explain everything by saying God, right? But, like, is that the simplest explanation? No, there's probably simpler explanations. Right. And if I find a simpler explanation that explains the entire scope, well, for me, that's more virtuous. I'm going to go with that theory because I don't have to postulate like more ontology than I need, like God, right? Like, it's just unnecessary.
Right.
So does that answer?
Yeah, it does. And I think my last question, maybe I'll let you guys move on, is around. So I tie some of this around into unfalsifiability, right? And I think I agree with you guys in the sense that anything that's unfalsifiable is kind of not. I don't know that it'd say it's not worth investigating, but it's not worth, in my opinion, belief, right? But
sure.
Does that kind of, and I've heard different comments on the shows of, if something's unfalsifiable, I don't want to use words like absurd, but it's not something worthy of belief, but at some level, again, around this, do we have to assume there are a few things that are unfalsifiable, again, to get us past solipsism? Or am I, again, conflating that?
So I'm trying to understand, because if you're saying, like, it seems to me that the solipsistic theory is unfalsifiable, but I'm admitting that could be the case, right? So, like, I'm going to say, like, I don't know how I falsify that theory, but in virtue of not being able to falsify it, like, it could be the case. That's fine, because I haven't actually identified some logical contradiction within the theory, right? Like, saying, like, we could talk about God, but if I have what's called an a priori argument for, like, atheism that just shows why God's impossible deductively, like, it didn't matter that the theist's theory was unfalsifiable. I can just have an a priori argument that actually debunks so you don't have to stick within just like the science realm of falsification. You can look at deductive arguments and go, okay, well, like, where's the logical contradiction entailed? That kind of debunks it. And you can kind of go from that standpoint. I think there's different ways to do it epistemically than just a falsification criterion necessarily. And then another one would be the thing you mentioned earlier about comparing worldviews, which, by the way, I don't know why atheists die on the hill to allow presuppositionalists to poke at their worldview. Don't do that. Everybody stop doing that. Don't let presuppositionalists go, how do you account for X, Y, and Z? Their whole thesis is that no matter what you say, God is a better explanation than anything you can offer, right? What the thesis is that intelligibility can only, if you put it in a syllogism or just a premise, intelligibility can only exist if and only if the Christian God exists. That is a burden that they have to show. They have claimed to solve the explanatory gap that they presume is there, right? And so it doesn't matter if like you're talking to a precept. You could just be illogical. You could be demented. Your brain could not work the way it worked yesterday, and it's just off, right? That could be the case, but it doesn't actually elucidate the explanatory gap they are positing solves the issue. And so I'm saying that as a rant because I see a lot of people go into these conversations and they feel the need to defend. You don't have to defend anything. You just have to show what you have to ask them for the actual argument why God serves as the actual explanation and why we even need that for intelligibility in the first place.
Well, and it seems very much like, to me, it always feels like a very simple shifting the burden of proof, right? And trying to bring that to somebody else, but they don't have to worry about it because they just presuppose it. And I've got some religious friends. I've got a couple good friends that are Mormon that I enjoy debating and are very open to debate with me and discuss this kind of stuff. And I've tried to get to call into the shows several times, but I've never encountered a precept, so I've never been able. I mean, other than watching them on shows and stuff, and I don't think I would, like most, enjoy discussing anything with the precept because of that stance, right? So okay, I guess my final question would then be: is there anything outside of this that is unfalsifiable, that is logical to believe in?
Well, like, so I'm trying to think of this on the top of my head, but like it could be the case that some non-natural realm exists or something, right? And we can't really falsify that given the natural means we have, but maybe deductively someone could show the entailment. But I don't know how that would be cashed out. I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate and say, we don't have to die on the hill for falsification. But I think if you're talking empirical, inductive evidence, then yes, you should, right? Here's the philosophical distinction, right? A posteriori considerations, which is a fancy word for empirical considerations, like you're going to have to falsify the claims dealing with a posteriori arguments. A priori, which is to say deductive, things that don't necessarily need experience of the world, but just deductive reasons. That's where I could find someone having an unfalsifiable claim or from like an inductive standpoint, but maybe deductively it follows. I'm a skeptic of that. So I don't claim that that's the case, but I'm just trying to posit maybe where they could rest their head,
Yeah, I got you. And because, I'll say for me personally, I think a lot and struggle a lot with solipsism, right? I mean, I'm certainly not a solipsist, right? But at the same time, it is one of the things philosophically that just really messes with me. And I'll admit that in some ways, what bore all this, my questions was, I find myself, I wouldn't say convinced, right? I found myself fascinated and that's the best word, around the simulation hypothesis, right? Brain in the vat, I mean, everything around solipsism, right? And I'm trying to look for ways, I think, to kind of break out of that, right? To debunk that to myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where I started with the precept, do we have to start with some sort of precept to get out of that? And so that's where I was going with this.
So yeah, I guess for me as a skeptic, like I don't feel the need to solve those issues in the sense I kind of accept that so I'm like a skeptic of a lot of things in metaphysics as well, or metaphysical claims, where I'm just gonna go, I don't know how we have access to that. I'm actually probably gonna take the bird and say we don't have access to that. It's just we can't, right? We're left in this level of speculation, which is fine, but I kind of use that as ammo in a sense, because if I am having, like you said, like if you're having issues, maybe it's the case that I'm a brain of that, or you have some considerations that you're trying to work through. Well, this just highlights issues, especially if we go back to the precept thing, right? If you go back to the root of what they presuppose, like God, well, it could be the case that God is deceitful and giving them propositions that are actually false, but he's revealing them as true.
Sure.
So this problem doesn't stop, it's not like any other buddy's position has solved this external world potential issue, because everybody is going under the basis of your phenomenology, your sense data. So the things that you think are revealed to you by God, or the nature that you're in right now, right, that this has been revealed to you that you're not a brain of that, we all have this issue of not actually having something completely justify that, which is why I'm a skeptic entirely is under this principle that this is just an issue for anybody and everybody, no matter how confident the person comes along. It just I don't see why people want to die on the hill and act like they're smarter than they are to say we can get around this. We can't. We cannot get around this.
And that's where I can't either. And just to be clear, right? Like I don't want to come off as, you know, that I actually believe this or would base any sort of worldview around or anything like that. It's just, you know, I remember in the chat earlier was kind of discussing like, you know, a little bit of what is belief or what is, you know, I felt like these kind of things, right? And that's, you know, where I say, I didn't want to use the word convinced. That was a poor choice. I think I even backtracked it a little bit, right? But I find that concept I always have fascinating since I read about it. And, you know, and I also, to clarify that, you know, to the point you made, I'm perfectly fine with not knowing certain things, right? And accepting that there are, you know, a million things. And that's another thing that was going on in chat, right? That, you know, we're all going to die not knowing things and understanding that, you know, things aren't going to be explained to us or certain things that are just outside of our ability, right?
Sure.
So, well, thanks.
I'd have to agree with the chat there.
What was that? Sorry, I didn't hear Jmike.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just saying I'd have to agree with the chat there. Like, that's, you know, that's just it's kind of the reality we have to accept.
I think that like the idea of hard like solipsism is something that we're all like most people come up to and struggle with at one point or another. So I think it's definitely something that I think I fall more on your side with that, Mike, that like I would almost take on that position too, that we can't access that. So
yeah, and you can use that as ammo towards theists when they tell you that God's been revealed something to them.
Yeah.
How do they know? The same way that like they would question you, how do you know that what's revealed to you is actually the world? How do they know that God's revealed true propositions to them? Because he can reveal false propositions. In both cases, no logical contradiction.
Right. Yeah. So I'm gonna let you go, Alex, because we are coming near the end of our time here. But I'll let you pop on for one more second here. Thank you so much for calling in today, and hopefully you come up with more ideas and call us back in the future.
Yeah, thanks for the call.
Sorry,
I just demolished over you the whole time there.
No, I was gonna say for anybody who is like listening to this later on in podcast, and not like seeing me, that was me being like totally schooled and just trying to sit back and listen to some people.
Oh no, don't.
I do. Well, I think I do kind of understand. I understand a lot of what you guys are talking about, and I have thoughts here and there, but there's just so many concepts and different words. We and I were talking about that earlier today. Yeah. That like a lot of these ideas are like they sound very big and intimidating, but there are things that like you can make sense of it once you kind of sift through and understand it more. So I love listening to those conversations because I don't feel like I have as much to add to it, but at the same time, once I hear everybody talk through it, I'm like, oh, I think I understand actually what they're talking about. But there's just different terminology sometimes. Like I'd never heard it called that external world problem. I'd only ever heard it called hard solipsism.
Yeah, external world. I call it external world.
Yeah, so just little things like that. I think is really interesting to listen to. So but I appreciate those kind of calls, and I sometimes struggle whether something like solipsism is a philosophical question or more of a psychological question. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like I've talked to people that have claimed they can show logical contradictions, but it's only in virtue of the argument that's presented. Like they had given an argument, and I go that doesn't follow. But the same way that we could debunk some theist argument for God doesn't mean that God now doesn't exist because we debunked like one argument, right? So I don't take the claim that I think some of my friends do, that just, you know, to me, I think it's just a level of hubris that I'm not willing to take.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you breaking that down and having that conversation with him.